Hey Bree, it looks like we got another good voicemail message today.
Oh, I can't wait to listen. Will you play it?
My name is Sierra, and I'm from North Kansas City High School here in Missouri. And my question is, how do laws affect teenagers' mental health?
Ooh, an episode about laws. Good idea, Sierra. What do you think, James?
Yeah, I think it's a really important topic. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
From PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs
And WETA,
this is On Our Minds.
with Bree,
And James,
a podcast made by teens for teens.
because everyone deserves a place to feel heard. Alright Bree, so this episode is going to be a little different.
Yep, today we are going to be discussing politics, including laws, policies, and some big debated topics.
And as podcast hosts, we're not going to be sharing our personal political beliefs, but rather help y'all understand the situation.
First of all, the reason we should have an episode about how laws are affecting teens is because in the last few years, schools have become focal points in our country's political debates.
And students like us, well, we're caught in the middle.
Over the last 3 years or so, states have proposed more and more legislation that would restrict or change the way teachers talk about race, American history, gender, and sexuality. There's also legislation aimed at limiting students' access to books.
PEN America is a free speech advocacy organization that is tracking this kind of legislation that limits or censors education. They've compiled a list of more than 350 recent bills, 31 of which have been passed into law.
A lot of the debate around teaching race and history has focused on critical race theory, or CRT, a term that is often thrown around and used in many different ways.
Student reporter Leeya Chaudhuri explored what's going on in her state of North Carolina regarding critical race theory. Here's Leeya.
Recently, there's been a lot going on over the topic of critical race theory here in my state. In March of 2023, North Carolina's Republican-dominated House passed legislation banning public school teachers from teaching racial topics that would make students feel guilty for past actions committed by people of the same race or sex. And some lawmakers have equated these racial topics to critical race theory. While the bill in North Carolina doesn't focus on prohibiting teaching the facts of an event, like what exactly happened, it does reflect a concern about teaching why an event happened. And the bill is so vague that it's hard to tell what exactly it says and how it might impact students. That's why I went around my school to find out what exactly students had to say about critical race theory and how this bill could affect them. So, have you heard of CRT, more specifically critical race theory?
I have.
I have.
I have heard of it.
Yes, I've heard of critical race theory, especially in the classroom over the past few years.
And have you ever had a teacher talk about critical race theory?
I don't think I've seen that in any of my classes. I don't even think I've heard a teacher say critical race theory.
Not really. Maybe I've heard my history teacher talk about it like once.
Could you give me a general definition of critical race theory?
I don't know critical race theory.
I don't know if I know the exact definition.
So clearly, a lot of students had heard of critical race theory, but didn't actually know what it was. That's why I wanted to hear the definition straight from the source. I had the opportunity to speak with Kimberly Crenshaw, law professor at Columbia University and UCLA School of Law, and the very person who coined the term critical race theory. This is how she defined critical race theory.
Simply, it is the study of structural racism, the various practices and the various laws that support those practices that create racial inequality. So that would include restrictive covenants that determine who could live where. It involved race segregation, who could go to school where, job discrimination that determined who could work where. We were law students after the civil rights movement. We were also interested in understanding, theorizing the way that race and racism continued to shape our lives, even after the civil rights movement.
Now, part of the problem with critical race theory is that not everyone agrees on a definition. I wanted to hear another perspective on critical race theory. So I interviewed Republican North Carolina State Representative Ken Fontenot, who is leading the cause against critical race theory in North Carolina.
Critical race theory is a collegiate level theory that in order to really understand, you have to go to college. Let's embody what we are now, and then also not kick a dead horse, but rather look at how we can improve now.
On the argument for teaching critical race theory, Professor Crenshaw emphasized a couple of reasons.
We need to know the history of how hard it was to create a democracy that really included everybody. And we need to know that history because at any given time, we might find ourselves going in the direction from which we came. The most significant thing that we can learn when we learn the history is empathy, not wanting something like this to ever happen again.
Because this bill would affect what can be taught in schools, I wanted to speak with the teacher. I talked to my AP Comparative Government teacher, Mr. Miller, who discussed his thoughts.
I think it's always helpful to have a theory on which to view, the world and history and current events today. And I've never actually heard a student mention CRT in a classroom setting. Who knows what lesson is going to make students feel uncomfortable? And so there's been some worry that even though North Carolina's curriculum right now is great, there is some worry that they could start stripping a lot of those views on race out of the curriculum just out of, political fear.
Now, when I asked students about their thoughts, they were pretty opinionated, and I wanted to share two opposing perspectives I got. Here's Aaron and then Sophia.
It gives people who are of minority status a cop-out, and it makes them think that they're victims and they can't do better, and it almost puts their mindset back a step as opposed to moving forward.
I think from the history of this country, everything today is founded in racism, so I think to not acknowledge that is kind of dangerous.
When lawmakers are considering what schools should or should not be allowed to talk about, I think they should consider what Mr. Miller told me.
Schools are one of the best places that you can have a lot of these discussions and where people can share different ideas. When you get outside of school is really where people are getting on like internet debates and people are framing definitions the way, however it's going to help their own political side.
I do want to leave you with some food for thought. When I asked Professor Crenshaw what she wanted to tell students around the country, this is what she told me.
Teenagers, young people, have a right to a full and complete education. So if you don't want people to take away your sensibilities about fairness and equity and justice, if you don't want to miss out on the amazing courage of so many people, then you have to say you don't get to determine what I get to learn. It's my right, it's my future, it's my country, and I want access to all of it.
I admire how Leeya really dug into critical race theory and got a lot of interviews. We got to hear different types of people with varying perspectives. It was really impressive reporting.
Yeah, it actually reminded me of what laws have been passed here in Texas regarding critical race theory. I remember CRT being a really hot topic amongst my friends on Instagram. In fact, in 2021, Texas passed a bill stating that teachers cannot be forced to discuss current events, and if they choose to, they must, quote, give deference to both sides.
So, what have you experienced in the classroom? Did teachers really do that?
Well, in my experience, I think that my teachers have given deference to both sides. But that being said, I've had the same two history teachers from 9th to 11th grade, so there really wasn't much change there. But both of my history teachers during those 3 years did a really good job of staying really neutral with a lot of topics.
Speaking of Texas, haven't they passed a number of anti-LGBTQ legislation?
Yeah, there have been a lot of anti-LGBTQ bills proposed in Texas and around the country. This year, in fact, the ACLU is tracking over 400 anti-LGBTQ bills in the US. These range from healthcare restrictions to bathrooms to school curriculum.
On Our Minds, Season 1 host Noah Konevitch explored this topic with an activist.
I hear people talk about queer joy, but I don't really feel like I have that anymore. It's more so just queer rage.
That was Billy. Billy is one of almost 2 million Americans who identify as transgender. I recently had the opportunity to sit down with Billy and talk about some legislation in her home state of Oregon and how it contributes to her mental health. When I say LGBTQ rights, what's the first emotion you feel?
Bit of anger. I'd say like I do enjoy and appreciate how many states have been focusing on enacting LGBTQ plus protections, but there's still the anger of how many states aren't doing that and how many states are still actively trying to ban us, essentially.
And personally, you live in the state of Oregon. Is there something that you've noticed that Oregon's government has done to protect LGBTQ rights that no other states have done?
I'm not sure how many states have done this, but I know that for House Bill 2002, that bill was signed by the governor and put into law in mid to late 2023. What House Bill 2002 essentially does is it not only provides protection for abortion and reproductive care, especially for minors, but it also ensures that all insurance companies within Oregon are required to cover gender-affirming care, and that's including hormones and gender reconstruction surgery.
And several states, such as California and Oregon, have enacted laws to make themselves refuge states, which, in a nutshell, basically protects anyone who flees to that state from being affected by outside courts and law enforcement. Do you think that this is enough?
It definitely is something that needs to be more widespread. And in an ideal world, we wouldn't even have the term refuge state because every single state would have these protections for that gender affirming care. A lot of these families can't just afford to pack up and move to a completely different state. They're not in any financial situation to where they can do that. How are they going to find housing? How are they going to find a job? There needs to be more social services and financial safety nets for people who need to go to one of these refuge states. Better services like at least temporary housing.
Is there any advice, anything you'd like to share for anybody who might be struggling with their mental health due to anti-LGBTQ legislation?
I just want to emphasize the fact that you are not alone. You're not alone in what you are going through. And there are ways that you can contact those communities. There are ways that you can advocate for affirming legislation to be passed. And I always like protests. If there are any protests happening around, go to it. If anything, it's a good way to let queer rage out. Just don't get hurt.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me, Billy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Noah.
It's true what Billy said. Teens still have a voice and can advocate for the changes they want to see.
And while most legislation is written by lawmakers, occasionally young people are consulted or even part of the law writing process.
Joining us now is a special guest who has actually written legislation. Vaishnavi Kambala, welcome to On Our Minds. Actually, welcome back because last season you produced a segment.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what grade you're in?
Yeah, sure. So I am a junior from New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm really passionate about mental health. I've done a few different things in this area. I created an app and I work with schools to, bring this as a free resource to students. And I also helped write a law, which I'm here to talk about today.
Wow, you created an app and a law. That's so impressive. So you worked with a state representative and the Louisiana Center for Health Equity to help write a bill. Can you tell us how you got to do that?
So I was originally part of the Louisiana Student Behavior, Mental Health, and Discipline Task Force. So we met at the state capitol and had meetings about youth mental health and, policy regarding it. So in a lot of other states, there's things called like mental health days. It's like a certain number of days per year. In other states, it varies by state. And I wanted to bring that to Louisiana. And also, I realized that, there's a lot of mental health resources out there that aren't as well known about. And I thought it was very important to make sure as many people could access them as possible. So I thought of those two ideas and brought it to the task force and was like, why don't we create a bill that talks about bringing these resources to school websites? Because depending on your school district, students go to school websites a lot. Like for us, our school menus are on there, our grades, that's how we check them. And families go on there too. So that's kind of a hub for all sorts of stuff. And I was thinking, like, based on a Washington law that was similar, what if we put like mental health resources on school websites so then they would be even more accessible? And then at the same time, it was like, why don't we have mental health days too? So then after talking, we decided maybe we could have 3 mental health days per year for students in Louisiana. And so that was part of House Bill 353, which had some other provisions as well. And I was able to, to help testify to the Louisiana House Education Committee on it. And eventually it got passed and went into effect this school year. And now I have 3 mental health days per school year in Louisiana now.
Wow, that is so awesome. And I definitely agree. I think it's so important for high schools to recognize and promote mental health awareness.
I'm so impressed with you. I'm just like listening and I'm in awe. Like, oh my gosh. But throughout this episode, we've been talking about hot topics such as how to teach and talk about race and history and gender and sexuality. So was there any debate or pushback around the bill you wrote?
I have to say there was a little bit of debate and pushback about, straight up, requiring school websites to have this stuff. But eventually it worked out.
That's awesome. So Vaishnavi, now that the bill has been passed and is an actual law, I was wondering, how is it actually affecting students, and have you received any feedback about it yet?
A lot of students I've talked to think that having the option to take those mental health days is really helpful. And I think they really like that option a lot because they say that it helps them feel more supported by their schools and the education system.
Are there any plans to try to get other states to pass similar legislation or even U.S. Congress, making it a national law?
There's been a growing push around the country to, pass legislation regarding, mental health days as excused absences, but regarding accessibility with the school websites, besides Washington, I don't think I've seen many states actually do this before, so I'm really hoping we can get this around the country, and in the future about US Congress, I really do hope to work with like a representative to, make this a national thing because it's so important. If we have resources out there, we want to make sure that as many people as possible benefit.
Lastly, do you have any advice for other teens who want to help write bills with their legislators?
The best way to start is once you have your idea, I think just reaching out because I feel like a lot of people underestimate the impact of just one cold email or calling up your representative's office because I guess if you're like a student, right, and especially if your idea is about something affecting students, your perspective is unique and very important. So oftentimes, more often than you think, people are willing to listen and really hear you out.
Well, Vaishnavi, thank you so much for speaking with us today and honestly inspiring us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Speaking of advising lawmakers, our next episode will be a conversation with the youngest advisor to the United Nations in U.S. history, Sophia Kiani.
Yeah, I'm so excited for that. Sophia Kiani is an Iranian-American social entrepreneur and activist. She's currently studying at Stanford.
And she's the founder of Climate Cardinals, the world's largest youth-led climate nonprofit. I'm honestly a big fan.
We'll talk to her about advocacy, climate change, and what to do about climate anxiety. You don't want to miss this episode.
Before we go, we have a podcast for you that we know you're going to love. PS Weekly is a brand new student-created podcast that sheds light on important issues in our country's largest school system, New York City.
Brought to you by the Bell and Chalk Beat. Each episode will tackle a different topic, including migrant students, book bans, career readiness, and more.
New York City just might be my hometown, but we know students across the country will find a lot to relate to here. I was a former student reporter for the Bell, so I can say with confidence you won't want to miss this.
Subscribe to PS Weekly now, wherever you get your podcasts.
On Our Minds Season 4 is produced by Student Reporting Labs in collaboration with KUOW's RadioActive Youth Media.
Today's segments were produced by Leeya Chaudhuri from Raleigh, North Carolina,
and Noah Konevitch from Lebanon, Pennsylvania.
This episode was produced by lead podcast producer Briget Ganske with help from Associate Producer Jaylah Moore-Ross and research and fact-checking by Simran Gupta.
Alayna Ly edited and mixed this episode. Approval and oversight by editorial director Marie Cusick and executive producer Leah Clapman.
The music by Joseph Broad. Additional music from Blue Dot Sessions.
If you or someone you know needs help, we have a list of resources at studentreportinglabs.org/mental health resources.